Consider it a peace offering from a newbie YouTuber. Alright everybody, welcome back to our second ever episode of Shelf Care. I am super excited for this video. This is one of my favorite parts of Booktube. These are one of my favorite types of Booktube videos to watch, is when people do tags. And I couldn't really find like any writing specific ones. So I thought it would be really interesting to kind of just make my own and then give it out to the world. So it's going to be a lot of introductory questions. And if you ever see me looking like over to the side awkwardly, it's because I have all of the questions pulled up on my computer and I'm like kind of sneaking glances over there, but also not being sneaky because I'm calling myself out right now. So question 1 is, what is your favorite genre to write? I really like to write science fiction and fantasy. I really like that science provides a lot of rules and a lot of structure that you get to kind of play within, and then you get to it gives you a box to think outside of. And then I like fantasy, mostly because like I said in the previous video, mostly because that's what I grew up with and what I grew up reading, and so there's a lot of like childhood nostalgia wrapped up in fantasy and quests and dragons. And question 2 is, what is the first story you've ever written? I would always get, whenever I'd get presents for like Christmas or my birthday or whatever, people would always give me, like, I got little booklets that were like, had like a little box that you could draw a picture in, but then they had lines underneath for you to write text that went with the pictures. But I think the first story I ever wrote was in one of those little booklets, and it was about a fairy who her whole fairy colony was like migrating, was like on a migration path or whatever, and then like as they're like taking off, she like poof loses her wings and then like plummets to the ground, and everyone flies off without her because they don't see that she's missing, and she goes, oh no, how am I gonna find my family again? And so she ends up like walking and like enlisting the help of all of these other creatures and people that she finds. I didn't finish it though, because unfortunately with those little booklets, you get stuck because if you run out of pages, what are you gonna do? So I think I ran out of pages and was like, she found some friends and now they're going, but I don't even think I made it to the point where she like actually found her family again. I distinctly remember that being the time that my grandmother, who was an elementary school teacher, taught me how to use quotation marks for dialogue, because I was trying to write dialogue in this little booklet, and my grandmother was like, you know, if you put little quotation marks around it, that's supposed to tell people that someone's talking right now. And I was like, what? It was pretty revolutionary for like 7-year-old me, 6, I don't know. But yeah, I think that was the first story that I ever wrote. Alright, question 3 is, what childhood stories influence your writing? I read a ton as a kid, but childhood stories that I read, Chronicles of Narnia was a big one, and this was 3rd or 4th grade. That was like part of the school curriculum, is we read all like 7 of them. So we like, not pansies, we're not just reading Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, we're going full ham. So we read all of them, and then I remember my sister had to read all of them, and my dad would like sit in the living room and read Chronicles of Narnia out loud to her, and I would just sneak down every once in a while and listen. And then also, a big influencer from my childhood reading was A Wrinkle in Time. I've read the first 3 of the quartet. So fun fact, if you didn't know, Wrinkle in Time is part of a series, and there's 5 of them, and I've only read the first 3, but I loved Wrinkle in Time as a kid so very much. I still do. I think that those books are fantastic. And another one, and this one's weird. I would have never like pegged this one as being super influential when I was a kid, but I've seen it show up so many more times in my writing. And this was another one we read for school. It was My Side of the Mountain. Has anyone even read that? Like, I read, oh gosh, it's been so many years since I've read it. It was about a boy who runs away from home and like lives in the woods on like the other side of the mountain from his home. And he like builds a little lean-to and like hunts for food and like trains a falcon or something, like a predatory bird, to like be his friend, and like all of these things. And I just remember that being like such a weird concept that like as a kid, like you could live by yourself in the woods. Like if you just like had enough of the right supplies, headed out there, like you could build a life out in the woods. And I remember that being really wild. But yeah, I think those definitely have to be some of the most influential books, both intentionally and not intentionally. So question 4 is, what published authors inspire you? And I have to say Madeleine L'Engle is a big one, the author of Wrinkle in Time. Just the way that she combines science fiction and fantasy together, I just think is a lot more interesting and a lot more compelling and a lot more creative than like super traditional like space opera, technical engineering, Star Trek-y stuff. I like that it's a little bit more like mystical and has a lot of fantasy aspects, and like not everything has to be super explained by science or made up science. But like some things just exist and we don't understand them, which feels very fantastical. And then another one, which is actually new for this year, is Susanna Clarke. She wrote, back in the early 2000s, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which I finally got around to reading. And I think it has to be my favorite book of 2020. I haven't read a lot of things in 2020, but I think that one takes the cake. Like, it's so fantastic, but it's about these two magicians in like Jane Austen, Edwardian era England, and they're both trying to bring back the use of practical magic in England, and it just is so absolutely wild, and there's so much depth and there's so much richness to the world building that Susanna Clarke does. I mean, this book is like over 800 pages, which is why it took me until quarantine to actually sit down and read it, but I absolutely loved it. For it being over 800 pages, I could have read another 800 pages. Like, I never once got bored, never once lagged, in my opinion. It is very long and it's hefty, but it was so good. And she does one of my new favorite things, which is fantasy footnotes, where she'll introduce something as a character will be like, have you ever heard of the story of such and such from the land of so and so? Then there'll be like a little asterisk, and then down underneath it'll be like, such and such from so and so, and like tell the whole story. And sometimes you just read through like 2 pages of a footnote. And it's so fun. I don't know, maybe that's really nerdy of me, but I really enjoy me some well-developed fantasy footnotes. She just released her second actual novel this year called Piranesi, which I bought but I haven't read yet. It's on my list to read over Christmas break. I'm so excited. Another one would have to be Andrew Peterson, and he's only written one book series. And I really like it because it just really evokes a lot of the classic Narnian, Tolkien, fantasy, sort of like middle grade kitsch trekking through this fantasy world, trying to find fun things and learn new things. I just thought it was really creative. More fantasy footnotes. Second author who uses fantasy footnotes. I really liked that. I just really liked the creativity and the ingenuity that it kind of felt tonally very much like a lot of the fiction and the fantasy that I had grown up reading, but it still felt new and creative in other ways. So question 5 is, what is the first novel you ever finished writing? I think I mentioned this in the first episode, and my confession, I've never actually published anything, and therefore I've never, like, finished everything, but I have finished writing things. Like, I have finished a draft. I finished a draft earlier this year, actually, of a story that I've been working on since, like, 8th grade. Which, if that doesn't sound like every amateur writer ever, then I don't know what does. But it was, like, a story idea that I came up in 8th grade, and it doesn't look anything like it did in 8th grade, except for that it's still vaguely dystopian, and characters are similar enough. But yeah, I finished writing the draft for that at the very beginning of quarantine and started working on a little bit of editing for it. But that was a very rewarding moment for me. There's another draft that I finished a couple years ago that I, for a while, claimed was the first draft that I'd ever finished, but it was also because I skipped the last, like, fourth of the content and just said, this thing is so terrible, it needs to be edited right now, and anything that I write from here on out is just going to be trashed, and why would I write it if I'm just going to trash it later? But it wasn't technically finished. I just decided that I was done with it. But yeah, definitely the story that I finished at the beginning of quarantine would have to be the first thing I ever finished writing, and it was incredibly rewarding. Question 6 is, what is your favorite story that you've ever written? And this one might be cheating because it's not a novel form, but I had an idea for a TV show that I used in, like, the final project of my screenwriting class. I decided to I wrote, like, half of the first pilot episode. The whole kind of concept behind it was, like, what if science could prove the existence of, like, the spiritual realm, like God and angels and demons and stuff like that. It was about a girl who worked for a company, and the company had developed this whole new branch of science that basically was, like, using the scientific method and scientific techniques in order to prove the existence of spiritual things. And that one is very near and dear to my heart. So then question 7 is, what is your favorite sentence that you've ever written? And I don't know if anybody actually keeps track of these. There's a certain sense of, like, instant gratification when you write a sentence and you're like, that sentence is a good sentence. And you're just, like, really pleased with the wordplay and, like, how all of it sounds, and it just really encapsulates everything that you wanted to say. I found 2. I had a hard time deciding, but I have one. See, I'm again having to read it off of my computer. It says, I will not have you topple this entire institution with your Chinese proverbs and that freaking traveling circus you've got tattooed on your arms. That was a dialogue quote that was said by somebody, and I just thought that was really, really funny. So that's a favorite sentence. And then my close second was, finding yourself in a bar during your darkest hours is probably a precursor to alcohol addiction. I thought was funny, mostly because it's said by a very pure and innocent person who's just, their whole life has fallen apart. And so I thought that was really funny coming from her in particular. But question 8 is, what is your favorite trope to write? What I really like to write is, like, highly structured plots, which might be a term that I've coined, but, like, Harry Potter I would consider to be a highly structured plot in the sense of, like, they're at school, and so you know that the story is going to take place over the course of the school year, and you know that there's going to be scenes where they're in class, and you know that there's going to be scenes where they're studying, and you always know that there's going to be a Christmas bit and a Halloween bit and then an end of school year bit, and you kind of know the direction that the story's going, and not in a predictability spoilery sense, but just in the sense of, like, I know where we're going. I think Hunger Games would probably count as another one, because, like, you know that Katniss, I mean, you know pretty soon after getting into the book that, like, Katniss is going to the Hunger Games, and you know that there's going to be a training period, and then you know that she's going to get sent off, and then you know that they're going to fight, and everyone's going to kill each other until you get down to the last 2 people. And so then what becomes interesting is, like, how that format is used. I think a common theme among all of my favorite things is, like, having a lot of structure and then figuring out how to work within that structure, which I think is why I like structured plots like this a lot. And I've noticed that a lot in my own writing as well. Like, I will gravitate towards, and I will build in my own structure so that, like, we know that we're going to this week-long festival, and every day of the week we have this different thing. What are we doing in between those events? How are those things gonna go? Who knows? But, like, you know that we have these things to look forward to. Another trope that I really like, and this one is near and dear to my heart, both in reading and in writing, is redemption arcs. Having a character who, usually not the main villain. I'm not all for, like, having main villains redeemed. Like, you need to have somebody who stays consistently a bad dude. It helps to have a consistent antagonistic force in your story, but, like, particularly with, like, side characters, I like that kind of wrestling with the gray area. Like, are they good? Are they not? You love him, but you just hate some of his decisions, and you're just like, I want the best for you, and you don't know what the best for you is, and he's just, like, watching. There's a lot of growth that happens, I think, in redemption arcs, more than, like, a good character turning more good versus, like, someone who is an antagonist turning into someone who's good. And then question 9 is, what is your least favorite trope to write? And I can only really think of one for this, because there's not very many tropes that I, like, actively avoid, but I've noticed that this is one that just, like, never really shows up in my writing, and that's, like, complex romantic situations. So, like, person A likes person B, but then their ex shows up in their life, and now that's super complicated. Or, like, love triangles. I'm much more of, like, I like the people that you can kind of see chemistry with from the beginning, and then you, like, root for that person till the end. But it's other things that come in. It's not other people always that come and complicate that romantic situation, but it's other things and relationship pressures and all of these other things, rather than romantic interest in other people. So that tends to be one of the tropes that I avoid in my writing, but then also in reading other things. And then question 10, our final question, is what stories do you hope to work on in the future? Other than the one that I'm working on for this channel, because that takes priority right now, is I really, really want to get more into writing screenplays, and particularly TV screenplays. That's something that I've really fallen in love with since being in college and taking some screenwriting classes. Like, the TV that I grew up with, and then even the TV that I watch now, even more than movies, influences the way that I think of character development, and I think of world building, and how I think of plot structure. And so I have a particular idea that I've been brainstorming and kind of nursing throughout quarantine, that I'd really, really like to write as a TV script. And I gave it a shot at a TV pilot a couple years ago, and it just wasn't developed enough, and I've only got, like, 10 pages in, and I can already think of, like, multiple ways that it should be different now. But yeah, that's definitely something that I want to work on in the future. So yeah, that's the writing tag, everyone. I think traditionally you're supposed to tag people in these and, like, tell them to go and answer these questions for themselves. But we're still new at this, so I don't really have anybody to tag except for you, I guess. Go take these questions, answer them, analyze and evaluate your own writing life. Alright, I think that wraps it up for this video. Comment down below if you have any interesting answers to any of these questions. I'd particularly like to hear them. And don't forget to like if you like the video. Just subscribe, as we will really be getting into planning the novel. I look forward to seeing you guys here for the next video, and don't forget to keep practicing your own shelf care.